I was halfway through my morning oatmeal when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Urgent. Cosigner default notice, Maple Ridge property. I set down my spoon and read it again. Cosigner. I'd never cosigned anything in my life. My hands were steady as I opened the email, but my heart was already racing. The message was from First Union Bank, polite but firm, informing me that the property at 847 Maple Ridge Lane was 3 months behind on payments, and as the cosigner, I was now liable for the outstanding balance of $412,800. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I read those numbers 3 times. The address sounded familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. Maple Ridge. That was the neighborhood my Uncle Gerald had been bragging about at family dinners for the past year. The one where he'd finally bought his dream house, the Craftsman with the wraparound porch and the Japanese maple in the front yard. The one he said proved he'd made it. My coffee had gone cold. I pushed it aside and opened my laptop, fingers moving automatically to my email search bar. I typed in Gerald's name and scrolled back through months of messages. Nothing about a mortgage. Nothing about co-signing. Nothing that would explain why my name was apparently attached to his house. But then I remembered something. February. Grandmother Dorothy's 76th birthday party. It had been at her place on Hillside Drive. The whole family crammed into her living room with too much cake and not enough chairs. I'd brought my work bag because I'd come straight from the office, and at some point during the evening, I'd left it in the spare bedroom while helping Aunt Pamela set up the dessert table. Inside that bag had been my folder of tax documents. I'd been planning to drop them at the accountant's office the next morning. My signature was on every page. I sat back in my chair, staring at nothing. They wouldn't. But even as I thought it, I knew they would. Uncle Gerald had always been the golden child in the family, the one who could do no wrong in Grandmother Dorothy's eyes. He was charming, loud, the kind of man who walked into a room and made everyone laugh. He told stories about his business ventures, his property flips, his investments. He drove a leased BMW and wore expensive watches. And whenever I was around, he had this way of looking at me like I was a cute, naive kid who didn't understand how the real world worked. At that same birthday party, after he'd had a few drinks, I'd mentioned that I was saving up for a down payment on a condo. Nothing fancy, just something small that would be mine. He'd laughed, not unkindly, but with that edge of condescension that always made me feel small. Someone has to be at the bottom of the ladder, Nat, he'd said, leaning back in his chair like a king holding court. That's just economics. Some people are renters, some are owners. You're young. Your time will come. Maybe. Everyone had chuckled. Grandmother Dorothy had patted his hand. I'd smiled and changed the subject because that's what I always did. I kept the peace. I stayed quiet. I made things easy for everyone else. Now, staring at that email, I realized what he'd really meant. He didn't think my time would come. He thought I'd always be at the bottom, funding his life from the shadows while he stood in the spotlight. I called the bank. The woman who answered was friendly, almost too friendly, like she dealt with panicked people all day and had perfected her soothing voice. "This is Jamie, how can I help you today?" I explained the situation as calmly as I could. "There's been a mistake. I received an email about a property I supposedly co-signed for, but I never signed anything. Can you pull up the file?" There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Okay, let me see here. Natalie Brooks, right?" "Yes. And the property is 847 Maple Ridge Lane?" "That's what the email says, but again I didn't sign anything." More typing. Then her voice shifted just slightly from friendly to careful. "I'm showing here that you're listed as the co-borrower on the mortgage. The loan was finalized in March of this year. Your signature is on file." I closed my eyes. "Can I come in and see the documents?" "Of course. We're open until 5 today. I'll let my manager know you're coming." The First Union Bank sat on the corner of Main and 3rd, a low brick building with tinted windows and a parking lot that always seemed half empty. I walked in just after 2 in the afternoon, wearing my work clothes and carrying a notebook. I wanted to look official, unbothered, like this was just another item on my to-do list. Jamie turned out to be a woman in her mid-30s with red glasses and a nameplate that said Jamie Foster, Customer Relations. She greeted me with a smile that faded when she saw my face. "You must be Natalie. Follow me." She led me to a small office in the back and gestured for me to sit. "I'm really sorry you're dealing with this," she said, pulling up something on her computer. "Let me get the file." Took a few minutes. While I waited, I studied the office. Motivational posters. A photo of Jamie with 2 kids at the coast. A coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Banker." It was all so normal. So mundane. And yet, somewhere in this building there was a document with my name on it that I'd never signed. "Here we are," Jamie said, turning the monitor toward me. "This is the mortgage agreement. You're listed right here as co-borrower." I leaned in. There it was. My full name. Natalie Rose Brooks. My birth date. My social security number. And at the bottom a signature. It looked like mine. The loops were right. The slant was close. But it wasn't perfect. I always cross my T's with a slight hook at the end. A quirk from childhood that I never grew out of. This signature didn't have it. "Can I see the original documents?" I asked. Jamie hesitated. "We usually don't show those unless there's a legal request." "This is a legal request," I said, keeping my voice level. "Someone forged my signature. I need to see the paperwork." She glanced toward the door, then back at me. "Let me get my manager." The manager was a man in his 50s named Dennis, with gray hair and the kind of tired expression that suggested he'd been working in banking too long. He sat down across from me and folded his hands. "Miss Brooks, I understand your concern, but I need to be clear. According to our records, everything was processed correctly. The notary signed off, the documents were filed with the county, and the loan was approved. If there was fraud, that's a matter for law enforcement." I met his eyes. "Who was the notary?" He pulled up the file. "Christine Ward." I wrote down the name. "And can I get copies of everything? The application, the signed documents, the notary certificate, all of it?" He sighed. "I can provide you with copies, but you'll need to file a formal dispute first." "Fine," I said. "I'll file it right now." He slid a form across the desk. I filled it out in silence, my hand cramping around the pen. When I finished, I pushed it back toward him. "How long until I get the copies?" 3 to 5 business days. I nodded, stood, and walked out without another word. In my car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Pamela. "Hey sweetie, are you coming to Sunday dinner this week? Grandma's making her pot roast." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, casting orange light through my apartment windows. I made tea, the kind that's supposed to be calming, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I started searching. Christine Ward, Notary Public, Ashford, Oregon. It didn't take long. Her name came up on a professional directory. She had an office downtown right next to a tax preparation service. I clicked on her website. It was basic, just contact information and a list of services. But there was a photo. A middle-aged woman with short gray hair and a friendly smile. I copied her phone number into preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My notes. Then I opened a new tab and typed in Gerald Brooks Property Investments. Pages of results. Most of them were listings, houses he'd supposedly flipped or properties he claimed to manage. But as I scrolled deeper, I found something else. A forum post from 2 years ago. Someone asking if anyone had done business with Brooks Property Solutions. The responses weren't kind. "Guy's a scam artist. Took my deposit and ghosted me." Another. "He's underwater on half his properties. Don't trust him." I kept reading. There were more. Stories of unpaid contractors, bounced checks, promises that never materialized. My uncle, the successful businessman, was drowning. And apparently, he'd decided I was his life raft. I spent the next hour going through my bank statements, looking for anything unusual. First, I didn't see it. Then I noticed something. Starting in April, a monthly automatic transfer of $1,500 to an account I didn't recognize. I clicked on the details. The account name was listed as Brooks Property Management. My stomach turned. I hadn't set this up. I would never set this up. But somehow, $1,500 had been leaving my account every month for 6 months. $9,000. Gone. I checked my savings. It was lower than I remembered, but I'd assumed I'd just been spending more. Now I knew better. I grabbed my phone and called my bank. It took 20 minutes of holding and transferring before I got someone who could help. I explained the situation. The woman on the other end, patient and professional, walked me through the transaction history. Ma'am, it looks like this was set up as a recurring transfer with your account credentials. Do you have any joint account holders? No. Have you shared your login information with anyone? Never. She paused. Then I'd recommend you file a fraud claim and change all your passwords immediately. We can start an investigation, but it may take some time. Do it, I said. File the claim. I'll change everything tonight. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a while, the weight of it settling over me. This wasn't just about a forged signature. Gerald had been siphoning money directly from my account, month after month, hiding it under the name of his fake company. And I'd been too trusting, too busy, too focused on keeping my head down to notice. I thought about all the family dinners, the holidays, the phone calls where he'd asked how I was doing, if work was going well, if I was managing my money okay. He'd been so interested, so encouraging. And the whole time he'd been robbing me. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from cousin Tyler. Yo, you still coming Sunday? Mom's making extra dessert. I turned my phone face down and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, replaying every conversation, every moment. And somewhere around 3 in the morning I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for an apology or try to make them understand. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to build a case, document everything, and take back what was mine. Quietly. Carefully. Completely. Because Uncle Gerald was right about one thing. Someone did have to be at the bottom. But it wasn't going to be me. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. My alarm went off at 6, and instead of hitting snooze like usual, I got up immediately. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat at my kitchen table with a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote documentation in careful block letters. Then I started listing everything I knew. The mortgage on Maple Ridge Lane. The forged signature. The automatic transfers from my account. The notary's name. The timeline. I worked methodically, writing down dates, amounts, every detail I could remember from the bank visit. When I finished, I had 3 pages of notes. It felt good to see it all laid out like that, tangible and real. This wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was evidence. I got dressed for work but called in sick at the last minute. I needed time and I needed to move fast before anyone realized I was looking into this. My first stop was the county recorder's office, a squat government building downtown that smelled like old paper and floor wax. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when I walked in. I need to see the deed records for a property, I said. She slid a form across the counter without a word. I filled it out, writing the Maple Ridge address in careful letters, and handed it back. She disappeared into a back room for what felt like forever. When she returned, she was carrying a thin file folder. You can look at it here, she said, gesturing to a table by the window. No copies without a formal request. I sat down and opened the folder. Inside were the deed documents, the mortgage paperwork, and the title transfer records. Everything had been filed in March, just like the bank said. I flipped through the pages slowly, reading every word. The property had been purchased for $485,000 with a down payment of $72,000. The mortgage was for the remaining balance. And there, on the co-borrower line, was my name, my signature, my information. I took out my phone and started photographing every page, angling the documents to avoid glare. The woman at the desk didn't notice or didn't care. When I finished, I closed the folder and slid it back across the counter. Thank you, I said. She nodded and went back to her computer. Outside, the air was cold and damp, typical for October in Oregon. I sat in my car and scrolled through the photos, zooming in on the signature. Really did look like mine. Whoever had done this had practiced, had access to multiple examples of my handwriting. I thought again about that birthday party. My bag left unattended in the spare room. How long had I been gone? 20 minutes? Half an hour? Long enough. I pulled up the notary's information on my phone and called the number. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. Ward Notary Services, this is Christine. My name is Natalie Brooks, I said, keeping my voice calm. I'm calling about a document you notarized back in March. A mortgage agreement. There was a pause. Okay, what about it? I wasn't present for the notarization, I said. But my name is on the document as a cosigner. I need to know who was there when you notarized it. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry, but I can't discuss client details over the phone. If you have concerns about a notarization, you'll need to file a complaint with the state notary board. I understand, I said. But this is a case of potential fraud. My signature was forged. Her tone shifted, became more careful. If that's true, you should contact law enforcement. I can't help you. And she hung up. I sat there for a moment staring at my phone. She'd sounded nervous, defensive even. That told me something. Either she knew the notarization was questionable, or she'd been sloppy and didn't want to admit it. Either way, she wasn't going to cooperate voluntarily. I made a note to follow up with the state board later. For now, I had enough to keep moving. My next stop was the library. I needed somewhere quiet to think, and I didn't want to be home in case anyone decided to drop by. The Ashford Public Library was a beautiful old building with high ceilings and tall windows. I found a corner table near the back and spread out my notes. Then I opened my laptop and started researching. I looked up mortgage fraud, cosigner fraud, identity theft. I read through legal forums and case studies, trying to understand my options. What I found wasn't encouraging. Proving fraud was difficult, especially when the forged signature was convincing. Even if I could prove it, the process would be long and expensive. And in the meantime, I'd still be on the hook for the debt. The bank didn't care who signed what. They just wanted their money. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, trying to think. There had to be another way. Something smarter than just filing a police report and hoping for the best. I thought about Gerald, about the way he operated. He was a talker, a performer. He built his life on appearances, on convincing people he was more successful than he really was. That meant he was leveraged, overextended. If I could find out just how deep he was in, I might be able to use that. I opened a new browser tab and started digging into public records. Property records, business filings, court documents. It took hours, but slowly a picture began to emerge. Brooks Property Solutions LLC had been registered 3 years ago with Gerald as the sole owner. But the business had no assets, no real income. It was a shell. The properties he claimed to own were either heavily mortgaged or in foreclosure. One had a lien against it for unpaid contractor fees. Another had been sold at a loss. He wasn't a successful investor. He was barely staying afloat. And now I understood why he'd needed me. He couldn't qualify for a mortgage on his own anymore. His credit was probably trashed, his debt-to-income ratio too high. So he'd used my name, my clean credit, my financial stability to get the loan he wanted. I was his cover, his scapegoat. By the time I left the library, it was almost dark. I drove home slowly, my mind racing with possibilities. I needed help. Someone who understood the legal side of this and could help me figure out a strategy. I couldn't afford a big law firm, but maybe I didn't need one. Maybe I just needed someone smart and willing to think creatively. I thought about Robert Chun, an attorney I'd met a few years ago at a professional networking event. He'd given me his card, told me to call if I ever needed legal advice. I'd never followed up, but I still had the card somewhere in my desk drawer. When I got home, I dug through my files until I found it. Chan & Associates, Estate and Property Law. The office was on Oak Street, not far from downtown. I pulled out my phone and drafted an email. Mr. Chun, my name is Natalie Brooks. We met briefly at a finance networking event 2 years ago. I'm reaching out because I'm dealing with a complex situation involving mortgage fraud and identity theft, and I need legal guidance. Would you have time for a consultation this week? I'm happy to pay your standard rate. I read it over twice, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came faster than I expected. The next morning, while I was getting ready for work, my phone buzzed with a reply. Miss Brooks, I remember you. I have an opening tomorrow at 2. My office is at 412 Oak Street. Let me know if that works. I typed back immediately. That works. Thank you. I'll see you then. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went to work, sat through meetings, answered emails, and pretended everything was normal. But underneath, I was buzzing with nervous energy. Tomorrow I'd know whether I had a real shot at fixing this or whether I'd be stuck fighting a losing battle for years. That evening my phone rang. It was Grandmother Dorothy. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hello, Grandma." "Natalie dear," her voice was warm, affectionate. "I haven't heard from you in a few days. Is everything all right?" "I'm fine," I said, forcing brightness into my tone. "Just busy with work." "Well, don't work too hard," she said. "You know, Gerald was just telling me how proud he is of you. Says you've really got your life together." My jaw tightened. "That's nice of him to say. He mentioned you might be helping him with some business paperwork," she continued. "Something about a property investment. Is that right?" I closed my eyes. So that's how he was spinning it. Making it sound like I was a willing participant, a partner in his schemes. Of course Grandmother Dorothy believed him. She always believed him. "I haven't been helping him with anything," I said carefully. "There might be some confusion." "Oh well, you know Gerald," she said with a little laugh. "Always getting his wires crossed. Anyway, I'm calling because we're having Sunday dinner this week, and I'd love for you to come. I haven't seen you in ages." "I can't this week," I said. "I have plans." She sounded disappointed. "Well, don't be a stranger, dear. Family is important." "I know, Grandma. I'll talk to you soon." After I hung up, I sat on my couch staring at the wall. She had no idea. None of them did. They saw Gerald as the golden child, the success story, the one who'd made something of himself. And they saw me as the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need attention or praise. I'd spent so long playing that role that I'd almost believed it myself. But now, sitting in the dim light of my apartment, I realized something. Being underestimated was its own kind of power. They didn't think I'd notice. They didn't think I'd fight back. And that was going to be their biggest mistake. The next afternoon, I left work early and drove to Oak Street. Chan and Associates was housed in a converted Victorian, painted pale blue with white trim. It looked more like someone's home than a law office, which I found oddly comforting. Inside, the reception area was small but well kept, with hardwood floors and a desk where a young woman sat typing. "I'm here to see Mr. Chan," I said. 2 o'clock appointment. She smiled and gestured to a chair. "He'll be right with you." I sat down and tried to calm my nerves. A few minutes later, a door opened and a man stepped out. Robert Chun was probably in his mid-40s, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and had the kind of calm, steady presence that immediately put me at ease. "Miss Brooks," he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you again." "Thank you for making time," I said, shaking his hand. "Of course. Come on back." His office was lined with bookshelves, every surface covered with files and legal texts. He gestured to a chair across from his desk and sat down. "So," he said, folding his hands, "tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. The email from the bank, the forged signature, the automatic transfers, the birthday party, Gerald's financial troubles. I laid it all out methodically the way I'd practiced in my head. Robert listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, he sat back and studied me for a moment. "You've done your homework," he said. "That's good. It's going to make this a lot easier." "So you think there's something we can do?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "There's always something you can do. The question is what you want the outcome to be. This isn't just a legal problem, Miss Brooks. It's a strategic one. You could go to the police, file a fraud report, try to get your name removed from the mortgage. That's the obvious route. But it's also slow, messy, and there's no guarantee you'll get the result you want. What's the alternative?" His eyes sharpened. "You take control of the situation yourself. You don't just defend. You position." I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "you stop thinking of yourself as the victim and start thinking of yourself as the creditor. Right now, your uncle has something that belongs to you. Your name, your credit, your money. He's counting on you being too passive to fight back. So we don't fight the way he expects. We don't make noise. We build leverage." He opened a drawer and pulled out a legal pad, sketching out a rough diagram. "First, we document everything. Every transaction, every communication, every piece of evidence. We build a file so airtight that no one can question what happened. Then we explore your options for taking control of the debt itself. If the mortgage is in default, that creates an opportunity. We could work with the bank to restructure the loan, potentially putting you in the primary position. Or we could purchase the debt outright through a holding entity. Either way, you end up with control of the asset, not just liability. I stared at him. You mean I'd own the house? Potentially, he said. Or at the very least, you'd own the leverage. And leverage, Miss Brooks, is what changes the power dynamic. Your uncle put your name on this mortgage because he thought you were an easy mark. Let's prove him wrong. I sat there for a moment processing. It was bold. It was risky. But it was also the first thing anyone had said that made me feel like I wasn't just drowning. How much would this cost? I asked. He named a figure. It wasn't cheap, but it was manageable. I had savings and I had a steady income. More importantly, I had motivation. I'll do it, I said. He smiled just slightly. Good. Then let's get started. Over the next week, Robert and I worked together to build the case. I provided him with every document, every photo, every piece of evidence I'd collected. He filed a formal fraud claim with the bank and contacted the notary board to request an investigation into Christine Ward's certification. He also reached out to the mortgage company to inquire about the loan's status. What we found was damning. The mortgage was now 4 months in arrears. Gerald hadn't made a payment since June. The bank was preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings, which meant they were motivated to find a solution. Any solution. Robert drafted a proposal. We'd form a limited liability company, Brookstone Holdings, and offer to purchase the distressed mortgage at a reduced rate. The bank would get some of their money back immediately, and we'd take over the loan. It was a win for them and a strategic move for me. But there was one more thing we needed to do. We needed to confront Gerald, not emotionally but legally. Robert prepared a cease and desist letter, formally demanding that Gerald stop using my name, my credit, and my financial information. The letter also informed him that we were pursuing legal action for fraud and identity theft. It was sent via certified mail to his home address and to the address listed for Brooks Property Solutions. I didn't hear from him right away. For a few days there was nothing. And then on a Friday evening my phone rang. It was Gerald. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? Natalie, his voice was tight, strained. We need to talk. I didn't respond right away. I just waited. What the hell is this letter? He said, his tone shifting to anger. You're suing me? You're trying to take my house? It's not your house, I said calmly. It's a house you fraudulently put in my name. There was a pause. Then he laughed, sharp and bitter. Come on, Nat. This is family. We can work this out. You didn't have to get lawyers involved. You stole my identity, I said. You forged my signature. You've been taking money from my account for months. What exactly did you think I was going to do? He sighed, and I could almost see him rubbing his face, playing the part of the misunderstood victim. Look, I was in a tough spot, okay? I needed help. I thought you'd understand. You didn't ask, I said. You took. And now you're going to deal with the consequences. Natalie, please, his voice softened, trying a different tactic. I'm family. We can figure this out. Don't do this. I took a breath. The lawyer already sent the paperwork, Gerald. It's out of my hands now. And I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something else. Something that felt like power. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to him. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't cried. I just told him the truth. And it felt good. That night, I got a text from Aunt Pamela. What's going on with you and Gerald? He's upset. Call me. I deleted it. Then I got one from Cousin Tyler. Dude, why are you being so dramatic? It's just business. I blocked his number. Grandmother Dorothy left a voicemail. Natalie, sweetheart, I don't know what's happening, but Gerald is very hurt. Please, call me so we can talk about this like adults. I saved the voicemail but didn't respond. I wasn't interested in talking. I was interested in winning. And I was just getting started. The following Monday, Robert called me with news. The bank had accepted our proposal. Brookstone Holdings LLC would purchase the distressed mortgage for $320,000, a significant discount from the outstanding balance. The paperwork was already in motion, and within 2 weeks, we'd have full control of the loan. That means you're now the lender, Robert explained over the phone. Gerald owes you, not the bank. And if he doesn't pay, you have the legal right to foreclose. I sat at my desk at work, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what he was saying. So I own his debt. Exactly. And more importantly, you own the leverage. He can't ignore you. He can't manipulate you. Every move he makes now, you control the outcome. I thanked him and hung up, then sat staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. Something had shifted. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I wasn't reacting. I was 3 steps ahead and Gerald had no idea. That evening, I drove past the house on Maple Ridge Lane. I hadn't been there since Gerald bought it, hadn't seen it up close. It was just as he described at family gatherings. A charming craftsman with a wide front porch, stone pillars, and that Japanese maple in the yard, its leaves turning brilliant red in the autumn light. The house looked peaceful, well-maintained, like the kind of place someone responsible would live. But I knew better now. I knew it was built on lies, on stolen credit, on my name. I parked across the street and sat there for a while watching. Lights were on inside. I could see movement through the front window. Aunt Pamela probably, or maybe Tyler. They had no idea what was coming. Part of me felt a pang of guilt. These were people I'd grown up with, people I'd shared holidays and birthdays with. But then I remembered the automatic transfers, the $9,000 siphoned from my account, the casual cruelty of Gerald's words at that birthday party. Someone has to be at the bottom. He decided it would be me. And everyone else had let him. The guilt faded. I started the car and drove home. Over the next few days, I focused on work, keeping my head down and my schedule full. It was easier that way, easier to avoid the flood of messages from family members who'd suddenly decided I was worth reaching out to. Grandmother Dorothy called twice more. Aunt Pamela sent a long rambling email about family loyalty and forgiveness. Even my cousin Tyler, who'd barely spoken to me in years, left a voicemail asking if we could meet for coffee and talk things through. I ignored all of it. I wasn't interested in their version of resolution, which would inevitably involve me backing down, apologizing for making waves, and letting Gerald off the hook. That wasn't going to happen. Not this time. On Thursday, Robert called again. "We need to meet," he said. "There's been a development." I met him at his office that afternoon. He had a stack of papers on his desk and a look on his face that I couldn't quite read. "Sit down," he said, and I did. "Gerald filed a counterclaim," he said, sliding a document across the desk. "He's arguing that you gave verbal consent to be added to the mortgage, and that the automatic transfers were part of an agreed-upon family loan arrangement." I stared at the document, my stomach twisting. "That's not true." "I know," Robert said calmly, "and we can prove it. But this is what he's going to do now. He's going to lie, twist the narrative, and try to make you look like the aggressor. That's his only play. Can he win?" I asked. Robert shook his head. "Not with the evidence we have. But he can make it messy. He can drag this out, cost you time and money, and hope you give up." He leaned forward. "The question is, do you want to keep fighting in court? Or do you want to end this faster?" "What do you mean?" "There's another option," he said. "We go directly to him with an offer. Not a settlement where you give up your claim, but a restructure where he has no choice but to comply. We present him with terms. He can either accept them and keep some dignity, or we move forward with foreclosure and public legal action. Either way you win. But one path is quicker and quieter." I thought about it. The idea of dragging this through courts, of more letters and more lies, exhausted me. But the idea of giving Gerald an easy out made my skin crawl. "What kind of terms?" I asked. Robert pulled out a notepad and started writing. "First, he transfers the property title entirely into Brookstone Holdings. No more co-ownership, no more shared liability. Second, he signs a promissory note for the full amount he owes you, including the fraudulent transfers. We set a payment plan, maybe over 5 years with interest. Third, he agrees to a public acknowledgement of the fraud, in writing, and he resigns from any business entities that use your name or credit. And fourth, if he misses a single payment, the house goes into immediate foreclosure and he's out. No appeals, no extensions." I stared at the list. It was brutal. It was also fair. "And if he refuses, then we go to court," Robert said. "And we win. It'll just take longer." I nodded slowly. "Let's give him the option." Robert smiled. "I'll draft the offer." The offer was delivered the next day, again via certified mail. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. Then on Sunday morning my phone rang. It was Gerald. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. What? I said flatly. You're really going to do this, he said. His voice was different now. Smaller. Less certain. You're really going to destroy me. I didn't destroy you, I said. You did that yourself. There was a long silence. Then he said, voice tight, I need more time to think about it. You have until Wednesday, I said. After that, we proceed with foreclosure. Natalie, please. I hung up. My hands weren't shaking this time. I felt steady, clear, like I'd finally stepped into a version of myself I'd been avoiding for years. That afternoon, I went for a walk along the river trail near my apartment. The air was crisp, the sky a pale gray, and the water moved slowly past the rocks. I thought about everything that had happened, about how easy it would have been to stay quiet, to keep playing the role everyone expected. The dependable one. The one who didn't cause problems. But that version of me would still be bleeding money, still be tied to a mortgage she didn't sign, still be funding someone else's life while her own stalled out. On Monday, I got an email from Aunt Pamela. The subject line was, "We need to talk." I opened it reluctantly. Natalie, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this has gone too far. Gerald made a mistake, yes, but he's family. He's your uncle. You're tearing this family apart over money, and I think you need to take a step back and remember what really matters. Your grandmother is heartbroken. She doesn't understand why you're being so cold. We've always been there for you, and this is how you repay us? I read it twice, then closed my laptop. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. They still didn't get it. They thought this was about money, about grudges, about me being petty. They didn't understand that this was about something deeper. It was about being seen. About refusing to disappear. On Tuesday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Is this Natalie Brooks? A woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Christine Ward. The notary. I sat up straighter. I wanted to reach out, she continued, because I received a notice from the state board about the mortgage notarization. And I need you to know that I didn't realize there was anything wrong. I was told you were unable to attend the signing due to a work conflict, and that your uncle had power of attorney. I felt my jaw tighten. I never gave anyone power of attorney. I know that now, she said quietly. And I'm sorry. I should have verified it more carefully. I was rushed that day and I didn't follow protocol the way I should have. I'm cooperating fully with the investigation, and I wanted you to know that I'll testify if needed. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Her testimony would make the case airtight. After we hung up, I texted Robert. The notary just called. She's willing to testify. His response came immediately. Excellent. That changes everything. On Wednesday morning, I woke up to an email. It was from Gerald's personal address, not his business one. The subject line was acceptance. I opened it with my heart pounding. Inside was a scanned copy of the agreement Robert had drafted, signed, and dated. Underneath, Gerald had written a single sentence. I agree to the terms. Let's finalize this and move on. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just compliance. I forwarded the email to Robert with a short message. He signed. Robert's response was immediate. Good. I'll have the final paperwork ready by Friday. This is over. But it didn't feel over. Not yet. That afternoon, I finally responded to Grandmother Dorothy's voicemail. I called her back, and she answered on the first ring. Natalie, she said, relief flooding her voice. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. Grandma, I need you to listen to me, I said. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. I'm doing this because Gerald stole from me. He forged my signature, he took money from my account, and he put me in a position where I could have lost everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, he told me it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't, I said. And I have all the proof. I have the documents, the bank records, everything. He lied to you just like he lied to me. But Natalie, he's struggling, she said, her voice breaking. He's made mistakes, but he's still your family. I know, I said. And I'm not trying to destroy him. I'm just making sure he can't do this to me again. There was a long pause. Then Grandmother Dorothy said, I don't know what to say. Say you understand, I said quietly. Say you see why I had to do this. She sighed a deep, tired sound. I'm trying, Natalie. I really am. That was all I could ask for. On Friday, I met Robert at his office to sign the final paperwork. The title transfer, the promissory note, the acknowledgement of fraud. It was all there, neat and official. Gerald had signed everything. As I added my signature to the last page, Robert looked at me with something like approval. "You handled this well," he said. "A lot of people would have let emotion take over. You stayed focused." "I just wanted it to be fair," I said. He nodded. "It is. And now you're in control." The documents were filed that afternoon. By Monday, Brookstone Holdings LLC was the official owner of the property on Maple Ridge Lane. Gerald was no longer the owner. He was the tenant, paying rent to me with a 5-year plan to buy back his debt. If he missed a payment, he was out. It was clean. It was legal. And it was mine. That week, I changed my phone number. I didn't tell anyone in the family except grandmother Dorothy, and only because I didn't want her to worry. Everyone else I let fall away. If they wanted to reach me, they could email. But I wasn't going to be available for guilt trips or manipulation anymore. I also started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I'd let things go on for so long. Why I'd been so afraid to stand up for myself. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Ellison, asked me in our second session, "What did you think would happen if you said no?" I thought about it. "I thought they'd stop loving me," I said. She nodded. "And now?" "Now I know they didn't love me the way I thought they did," I said. "They loved what I could do for them." She smiled gently. "That's progress." Over the next few weeks, I started rebuilding. I opened a new savings account and set up automatic transfers into it, this time ones I actually controlled. I updated my credit monitoring and put freezes on all my accounts. I started saying no to things, little things at first, like after-work drinks I didn't want to attend or projects that weren't my responsibility. Felt strange at first, uncomfortable. But it also felt right. I was learning to protect my space, my time, my energy. And I was learning that I didn't owe anyone an explanation. One Saturday in early November, I drove back to Maple Ridge Lane. Not to confront anyone, just to see it again. The leaves on the Japanese maple had mostly fallen now, leaving bare branches against the gray sky. The house looked the same, but I felt different looking at it. It wasn't a symbol of betrayal anymore. It was just a house. A financial asset. A reminder that I'd fought for myself and won. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Tyler. I know you changed your number. Just wanted to say I get it now. Dad told me the truth. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Thank you. I appreciate that." He responded quickly. "Are we okay?" I thought about it. Then I wrote, "We're not close. But we're okay." And I meant it. I didn't need us to be close. I didn't need a big reconciliation or a tearful apology. I just needed acknowledgement. And that was enough. As I drove home that evening, the city lights reflected off the wet streets, and the radio played something soft and instrumental. I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but steady. Grounded. I'd taken back my name, my credit, my life. And I'd done it without becoming cruel, without losing myself in anger. I'd just become precise, clear, unshakable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not at the bottom. Not at the top. Just firmly on my own ground, with my own name on the deed. The winter came quietly that year, blanketing Ashford in cold rain and occasional snow. I kept working, kept living, kept moving forward. The first payment from Gerald came through in December, right on schedule. $1,500 deposited into the Brookstone Holdings account. It was strange seeing his money come in, knowing that for once the flow had reversed. I wasn't funding his life anymore. He was paying back what he owed. Robert sent me a brief email confirming the payment. All clear for month 1. 11 more to go in year 1. I replied with a simple thank you and archived the message. I didn't need to dwell on it. The system was working. That was enough. Around that same time, I started noticing changes in how I moved through the world. Small things at first. I stopped apologizing when I hadn't done anything wrong. I stopped over-explaining my decisions. At work, when my manager asked if I could take on an extra project with an unrealistic deadline, I said no. Just that. No long justification, no guilt-ridden excuse. Just a clear professional no. He blinked, surprised, then nodded and moved on. It was that easy. I also started investing the rental income from the Maple Ridge property. Robert had helped me set up a separate account for it, and each month, after setting aside funds for taxes and maintenance reserves, I put the rest into a diversified portfolio. Stocks, bonds, a small percentage in real estate investment trusts. I wasn't trying to get rich. I was trying to build something stable, something that couldn't be taken from me. By January, I'd saved enough to start looking at properties of my own. Not anything big or flashy, just a small house with a yard, something I could actually afford without stretching myself thin. I spent weekends going to open houses, taking notes, comparing neighborhoods. It felt good to be looking for myself on my terms, without anyone else's agenda attached. One Saturday afternoon, I found a place I liked. A small bungalow on the east side of town, 2 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, and a backyard with an old apple tree. It needed work, but it had good bones. The asking price was reasonable, and I had enough saved for a solid down payment. I made an offer that evening. By Monday it was accepted. The closing was scheduled for mid-February. I didn't tell anyone in my family. This wasn't something I needed to share or celebrate with them. This was mine. When the day came, I sat in the title company office and signed my name over and over. But this time, every signature was intentional. Every document was something I'd read and understood. When the agent handed me the keys, I felt a kind of quiet joy I hadn't experienced before. I drove to the house and walked through it alone, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, my footsteps echoing on the empty floors. I stood in the living room and looked out at the backyard, at the apple tree with its bare branches waiting for spring. This was the first thing I'd ever owned that no one else had a claim to. No cosigners, no hidden agreements, no strings attached. Just me. That night I ordered takeout and ate it sitting on the floor of my new house, using a cardboard box as a table. I felt ridiculous and happy and completely at peace. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Ellison, my therapist. How did the closing go? I smiled and typed back. Perfect. She responded with a single word. Proud. I set the phone down and leaned back against the wall, looking around at the empty space that was now mine to fill. Over the next few weeks I moved in slowly. I didn't rush. I bought furniture one piece at a time, choosing things I actually liked instead of just what was practical or on sale. I painted the bedroom a soft gray blue. I hung curtains. I planted herbs in the kitchen window. I made the space mine. One evening in early March I was working in the yard, clearing out old weeds and pruning the apple tree, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer. Hello? Natalie, it's me. Gerald. I froze, my hand still gripping the pruning shears. What do you want? I just wanted to let you know, he said, his voice stiff, that I made this month's payment. It should be in the account by now. I already got the notification, I said. Is that all? There was a pause. Then he said quietly, I also wanted to say I'm sorry. I stared at the ground, at the pile of dead leaves I just raked up. For what specifically? For all of it, he said. For using your name. For taking your money. For making you feel like you didn't matter. I was in a bad place and I took advantage of you. That wasn't right. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did. And I'm trying to do better. Okay, I said. Thank you for saying that. There was another pause, awkward and heavy. Then he said, are we ever going to be okay again? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. But that's not something you get to decide. That's something I'll decide when I'm ready. He exhaled. A sound that might have been relief or resignation. Fair enough. We hung up. I stood there for a moment, shears still in hand, feeling the weight of the conversation settle over me. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was something. Acknowledgement. Accountability. A small crack in the wall he'd built around himself. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was a start. And maybe that was all I needed. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just the knowledge that he finally understood. I went back to pruning the tree, cutting away the dead branches to make room for new growth. In April, Grandmother Dorothy called. It was the first time we'd spoken in months. I answered, cautious but not cold. Hi, Grandma. Natalie, she said, her voice warm but tentative. I wanted to see how you're doing. I've been thinking about you. I'm doing well, I said. Really well, actually. I bought a house. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," I said. We talked for a while, carefully avoiding the subject of Gerald or the mortgage or anything that might bring up old wounds. She told me about her garden, about a new book club she joined. I told her about the apple tree, about the renovations I was planning. It was surface level, but it was civil. And for now that was enough. Before we hung up, she said, "I hope you'll come to dinner sometime. When you're ready." "I will," I said. "Just not yet." "I understand," she said softly. "Take your time." After the call, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching the evening light fade. I didn't know if I'd ever go back to those family dinners, back to the dynamic where I was expected to be quiet and accommodating. But I also didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt separate. And that separation felt healthy. It felt necessary. By summer, the house was fully furnished. I'd hosted a few friends for dinner, small gatherings where we sat on the patio and talked late into the night. I'd started a vegetable garden in the backyard, planting tomatoes and peppers and zucchini. I'd even adopted a cat, a scruffy orange tabby from the shelter who liked to sleep in the sun on the windowsill. Life had a rhythm now, a steadiness that felt earned. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was just living. One afternoon in July, I got an email from Robert. "Just wanted to update you. Gerald has made every payment on time. No issues. The agreement is holding." I smiled and closed the email. It was working. The system I'd built, the boundaries I'd set, they were holding. And I didn't need anything more than that. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a book, the cat curled up beside me, the smell of tomato plants drifting on the warm air. I thought about where I'd been a year ago, sitting in my old apartment, staring at that first email from the bank, feeling my world collapse. I thought about the fear, the anger, the crushing weight of betrayal. And I thought about how far I'd come. Not because I'd destroyed anyone, not because I'd gotten revenge, but because I'd chosen myself. I'd drawn a line and refused to cross back over it. In August, I got a message from cousin Tyler. He'd been reaching out occasionally, short texts that never asked for anything, just checking in. This time he said he was in town and asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I thought about it for a day, then said yes. We met at a cafe downtown. One of those places with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Tyler looked older than I remembered, more tired. He ordered a black coffee and sat across from me, hands wrapped around the cup. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted. He nodded. "I get it. I've been a jerk. We all have." I didn't argue. "So what's this about?" I asked. He looked down at his coffee. I wanted to apologize. For real this time. I knew what Dad was doing and I didn't say anything. I thought it was just family stuff, you know? I thought you'd be fine. But you weren't fine and I should have said something. "I appreciate that," I said. He looked up. "Are we okay? Genuinely?" "We're getting there," I said. "But it's going to take time." He nodded and we sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "For what it's worth, I think what you did was smart. I don't think I could have pulled that off." "You didn't have to pull anything off," I said. "You just had to not participate." He winced. "Fair." We finished our coffee and talked about safer things. His job, his girlfriend, a trip he was planning. It was stilted at first, but it got easier. When we parted ways, he hugged me, quick and awkward, and said, "I'll do better." "I believe you," I said. And I did. In September, I finally went back to one of Grandmother Dorothy's dinners. I didn't announce it ahead of time. I just showed up, carrying a bottle of wine and a store-bought pie. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Aunt Pamela froze with a serving spoon in her hand. Tyler looked up from his phone, surprised. Grandmother Dorothy's face lit up, and she hurried over to hug me. "Oh, Natalie, I'm so glad you're here." I hugged her back, and for a moment it felt like old times. But then I saw Gerald. He was standing by the window, holding a glass of water, looking smaller somehow. We made eye contact, and he gave a small nod. I nodded back. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Dinner was awkward at first. People didn't know what to say, how to act around me. But eventually conversation picked up. Tyler told a story about a disastrous camping trip. Aunt Pamela asked about my new house. Grandmother Dorothy showed me photos from her book club. I stayed for dessert, then excused myself early. As I was leaving, Gerald followed me to the door. "Natalie," he said quietly. I turned. "Thank you," he said, "for coming." "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I did it for Grandma." He nodded. "I know. But still. Thank you." I left without another word. Driving home, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd proven to myself that I could walk into that space and walk out again on my own terms. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed to know I could exist in their world without losing myself. And I could. By October, a full year after that first phone call from the bank, I found myself standing in my backyard watching the apple tree. It had fruited for the first time that fall, small green apples that weren't quite ripe yet but held the promise of something sweet. I thought about everything that had changed. The house I owned. The boundaries I'd built. The life I'd reclaimed. I thought about Gerald's words from that birthday party. Someone has to be at the bottom. He'd been wrong. There was no bottom. There was just people who let themselves be used and people who didn't. And I wasn't going to be used anymore. Not by family, not by anyone. I'd learned to value my name, my signature, my worth. And I'd learned that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was patience. It was power. That evening I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, the cat on my lap, and watched the sun set over my small piece of the world. I thought about sending a message to Robert, thanking him for everything. But I didn't. He already knew. Instead, I opened my laptop and started drafting something new. A budget for the next year. Plans for the house. A timeline for paying off my own mortgage early. Goals that were mine and mine alone. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just focused. And that focus had given me something I'd never had before. Freedom. The kind that came from knowing exactly who I was and what I was worth. The kind that couldn't be forged, couldn't be stolen, couldn't be signed away. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. I thought about the girl I'd been a year ago, the one who stirred honey into her tea, and answered a phone call that changed everything. She'd been scared. She'd been hurt. But she'd also been strong enough to fight back. And that strength had brought me here. To this porch, this house, this life. I raised my glass to the empty air, to no one and everyone. To the bottom, I said quietly. And then I smiled. Because I wasn't there. I never had been. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to climb. And now, standing on solid ground with my own name on the deed, I finally understood what it meant to be free. The months that followed settled into a rhythm I'd never experienced before. There was no drama, no crisis calls in the middle of the night, no sudden financial emergencies that required me to step in and fix. For the first time in my adult life, I was living without the constant undercurrent of anxiety that came from being everyone's safety net. The payments from Gerald continued like clockwork. Every month, $1,500 appeared in the Brookstone Holdings account. I'd set up automatic notifications so I'd get a brief email confirming the deposit, but I rarely thought about it beyond that. It had become just another line item in my financial records, no different from utility payments or grocery expenses. The emotional charge had drained away, leaving only the practical reality of a debt being repaid. In November, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from the Ashford Community Foundation, a local nonprofit I'd never heard of. Inside was an invitation to a donor appreciation event. I almost threw it away, assuming it was a fundraising solicitation sent to the wrong address, but something made me read it more carefully. At the bottom of the letter, in small print, it mentioned that the event was specifically for individuals who'd made significant contributions to their scholarship fund within the past year. I frowned, confused, then opened my laptop and searched for my name in connection with the foundation. What I found surprised me. Apparently, when Robert had helped me set up Brookstone Holdings, he'd also established a provision that redirected a portion of the rental income into a charitable giving account. I'd approved it at the time, but in the chaos of everything else, I'd forgotten about it. That account had been making quarterly donations to the Community Foundation Scholarship Program, specifically funding educational opportunities for first-generation college students studying finance and business. The amount wasn't enormous, maybe a few $1,000s over the course of the year, but it was enough to make a difference. Enough to help someone who might otherwise struggle to afford textbooks or certification courses. I sat back in my chair, staring at the letter, and felt something shift inside me. Gerald's betrayal had tried to take something from me, had tried to use my resources to prop up his failing empire. But instead, I'd turned it around. I'd taken that same situation and redirected it towards something meaningful. His debt was now funding someone else's future, someone who actually deserved the help. I RSVP'd to the event. It felt important to go, to see where that money was going, to connect the abstract numbers in my accounts to real human impact. The event was held at a restored warehouse downtown, the kind of space with exposed brick and Edison bulbs that had become trendy for gatherings. I arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress, and immediately felt out of place among the crowd of well-dressed donors who all seemed to know each other. But then a young woman approached me, maybe 22 or 23, with bright eyes and a nervous smile. "Are you Natalie Brooks?" she asked. I nodded, surprised. "I'm Rachel," she said, extending her hand. "I'm one of the scholarship recipients. They told me you were coming tonight, and I wanted to thank you personally." I shook her hand, feeling suddenly awkward. "I didn't do much," I said. "You did more than you know," she said. "I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I'm studying accounting, and without that scholarship, I would have had to drop out last semester. I couldn't afford the CPA prep course I needed. Your donation covered it." I didn't know what to say. Rachel filled the silence, telling me about her program, her plans to work in nonprofit financial management, her dream of eventually starting a consulting firm that helped small community organizations manage their budgets. She spoke with such enthusiasm and clarity that I found myself smiling, genuinely smiling, in a way I hadn't in months. When she finished, she said, "I know you probably donate to a lot of causes, but I wanted you to know that this one changed my life. Thank you." She moved on to talk to other donors, and I stood there feeling something I hadn't expected. Pride. Not the hollow kind that comes from external validation, but the deep, quiet kind that comes from knowing you've done something good without needing recognition for it. I stayed at the event for another hour, mostly observing, listening to other scholarship recipients share their stories. Each one reinforced the same truth. The money I'd fought so hard to reclaim wasn't just sitting in an account somewhere. It was moving through the world, creating opportunities, opening doors that might otherwise have stayed closed. When I got home that night, I pulled up the Brookstone Holdings account and looked at the full financial picture. The rental income from Maple Ridge Lane was steady. After taxes, maintenance reserves, and the charitable contributions, there was still enough left over to build a substantial emergency fund. I was in a better financial position than I'd ever been, even before Gerald's fraud. The difference was that now I understood the value of what I had. I understood that money wasn't just numbers in an account. It was security. It was freedom. It was the power to make choices without being backed into a corner. And I also understood that protecting it wasn't selfish. It was necessary. By December, the apple tree in my backyard had lost all its leaves, standing bare against the winter sky. I spent a weekend afternoon raking up the fallen apples that hadn't been harvested, composting them for next year's garden. As I worked, I thought about growth, about cycles, about how things that seemed dead in winter always had the potential to come back stronger in spring. My phone rang. It was Robert. "I haven't heard from you in a while," he said. "Just wanted to check in." "Everything's good," I said. "Gerald's still making payments." "No issues." "That's what I like to hear," he said. "But I was actually calling about something else. I've been thinking about expanding my practice, bringing on an associate who specializes in financial fraud cases. And I wondered if you'd be interested in serving as a consultant." "Me?" I said, surprised. "You have first-hand experience with this kind of situation," he said. "You understand the emotional and practical sides of it. And you handled your case with remarkable clarity. I think you could help other people who are going through similar situations." I considered it. The idea of turning my experience into something useful, something that could help others avoid the trap I'd fallen into, appealed to me. "What would that look like?" I asked. "Probably just a few hours a month," he said. "Reviewing cases, offering perspective, maybe sitting in on initial consultations. I compensate you fairly. You don't have to decide right now. Just think about it." "I will," I said. After we hung up, I sat on my back porch despite the cold, wrapped in a heavy sweater, and thought about what he'd offered. For so long, I'd seen what happened with Gerald as a personal failure, something I should have prevented, something that revealed my own weakness. But Robert saw it differently. He saw it as expertise, as knowledge gained through adversity, as something valuable that could be shared. Maybe he was right. Maybe the best way to reclaim power wasn't just to protect yourself, but to help others do the same. I sent him an email that evening. I'm interested. Let's talk details after the new year. His response came within minutes. Excellent. I think you'll be great at this. Christmas came and went quietly. I spent it at my own house, inviting a few friends over for dinner. We cooked together, drank wine, played board games late into the night. It was simple and warm and entirely mine. No family obligations, no forced cheer, no walking on eggshells around people who'd hurt me. Just genuine connection with people who respected my boundaries and valued my presence. On New Year's Eve, I found myself alone. Again, which felt appropriate. I'd started the year in chaos, and I wanted to end it in peace. I made a list, not of resolutions but of acknowledgements. Things I'd learned, things I'd survived, things I'd built. I wrote about boundaries, about the importance of documentation, about the difference between being kind and being a doormat. I wrote about the value of professional help, about how Robert's guidance had been worth every penny. I wrote about the scholarship recipients, about Rachel's bright eyes and clear ambition, about how redirecting pain into purpose felt like the truest form of healing. When midnight came, I didn't watch fireworks or make noise. I just sat in my living room, the cat on my lap, and felt grateful. Grateful for the fight I'd won. Grateful for the peace I'd found. Grateful for the person I'd become through all of it. January arrived with cold rain and a sense of renewal. I met with Robert to discuss the consulting arrangement. We outlined a simple structure. I'd review case files for potential clients dealing with family financial fraud, offering insights from my experience. I'd attend occasional meetings, helping people understand what they were up against and what their options were. The work wouldn't be constant, but it would be meaningful. My first case came in February. A woman named Elena, mid-30s, who discovered her brother had been using her identity to open credit cards. She sat across from Robert's desk, hands trembling, eyes red from crying. I listened as she explained the situation, and I saw myself in her. The confusion, the betrayal, the overwhelming sense that she should have known better. When she finished, Robert looked at me. Natalie, do you have any thoughts? I leaned forward. The first thing you need to know is that this isn't your fault, I said. People who love you aren't supposed to steal from you. The fact that he's family doesn't make it less serious. It makes it worse because he knew you'd trust him. Elena nodded, tears spilling over. I kept going. The second thing is that you have more power than you think. Right now it feels like everything's out of control, but there are steps you can take. Document everything. File reports. Freeze your credit. Build a case. And most importantly, stop protecting him. Stop making excuses. He made his choice. Now you get to make yours. She looked at me with something like hope. Did you feel this scared? She asked. Yes, I said. But I also felt angry. And I used that anger to fuel action instead of letting it consume me. You can do the same. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Robert to help Elena build her case. We connected her with credit counseling services, helped her file fraud reports, guided her through the process of disputing charges and protecting her identity. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. I was turning my pain into something useful, something that helped someone else escape a similar trap. By March, Elena had successfully disputed most of the fraudulent charges and had cut off contact with her brother. She sent me a thank you card with a handwritten note. You made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Thank you for showing me that I could fight back. I put the card on my refrigerator, next to a photo of my house and a drawing Rachel had sent me from the scholarship event. Small reminders that the hard things I'd been through weren't just scars. They were proof that I'd survived, that I'd learned, that I'd grown. Spring came early that year, and with it, the apple tree in my backyard bloomed. Delicate white flowers covered the branches, promising fruit later in the season. I spent weekends working in the garden, planting new vegetables, repairing the fence, building a small patio area where I could sit in the evenings. The house was becoming more than just a place I lived. It was becoming a home. One afternoon in April, I got a call from grandmother Dorothy. She'd been calling more regularly now. Brief conversations that never pushed too hard, but kept the connection alive. Natalie, she said, I wanted to invite you to something. A pause. Gerald is having a small gathering for his birthday next month. Just family. I know things have been complicated, but I think it would mean a lot if you came. I took a breath. I don't think I'm ready for that yet, Grandma. She was quiet for a moment. I understand. But I want you to know that you're always welcome. Whenever you're ready. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. After we hung up, I realized something. I didn't feel guilty for saying no. I didn't feel like I'd failed some unspoken family obligation. I just felt clear. I'd set a boundary and I'd held it. And that was enough. By May, the first apples were starting to form on the tree, small and green. I watched them grow, checking on them every few days, marveling at the simple miracle of it. Life continuing, fruit forming, seasons turning. I'd helped 3 more clients through Robert's practice by then, each one dealing with some variation of financial betrayal by someone they trusted. Each one walking the same painful path I'd walked. And each one finding their way to the other side stronger and more aware. One evening, I was sitting on my back porch when my phone buzzed with an email. It was from the Community Foundation. Another invitation, this time to serve on their scholarship selection committee. They wanted input from donors who understood the challenges first-generation students faced. I accepted immediately. This was becoming part of my identity now, not the woman who'd been victimized, but the woman who'd turned that experience into something meaningful. The woman who helped others. The woman who built instead of destroyed. In June, I ran into Aunt Pamela at the grocery store. It was awkward at first, both of us standing in the produce section with our carts, unsure what to say. She spoke first. "It's good to see you, Natalie." "You too," I said, and I meant it. "How have you been?" She asked. "Good," I said. "Really good. I bought a house. I'm doing some consulting work. Things are stable." She smiled and it looked genuine. "I'm glad." We talked for a few more minutes, surface-level pleasantries, nothing heavy. When we parted, she touched my arm briefly. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, "for standing up for yourself. I know it wasn't easy." "Thank you," I said, surprised. It wasn't. That small moment of acknowledgement meant more than I expected. Not because I needed her approval, but because it confirmed that at least some people understood. At least some people saw what I'd done not as cruelty, but as self-preservation, as justice. July brought heat and long evenings. I hosted a small dinner party for the friends who'd supported me through everything. We sat on my new patio eating grilled vegetables from my garden, drinking cold wine, laughing about nothing in particular. At one point, someone asked how I was doing, really doing, and I paused to consider the question honestly. "I'm happy," I said, and I realized it was true. Not in the giddy, temporary way, but in the deep, grounded way that comes from knowing you've built something solid. I'd reclaimed my name, my credit, my life. I'd turned betrayal into opportunity. I'd learned to say no without guilt and yes without obligation. I'd found my voice, my boundaries, my worth. And I'd done it all without losing myself in bitterness or anger. I'd stayed precise, strategic, focused. And it had worked. In August, the apples on my tree ripened. I picked them on a warm Saturday afternoon, filling a basket with small, tart fruit that wouldn't win any agricultural awards but tasted like victory anyway. I made applesauce, giving jars to friends and neighbors, keeping a few for myself. Each spoonful was a reminder. I'd planted nothing, yet here was fruit. The tree had been here when I bought the house, neglected and overgrown, and I'd simply cared for it. Pruned the dead branches, watered it during dry spells, protected it through winter. And it had given back. That night I sat on my porch with a jar of applesauce and a spoon, watching the stars come out. I thought about Gerald, wondered briefly how he was doing, whether he'd learned anything from all this. But mostly I thought about myself. About the journey from that first phone call to this moment. About everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. The losses were real. I'd lost my naive belief that family was always safe, that trust was always honored, that being kind was always enough. But the gains were bigger. I'd gained clarity, strength, independence. I'd gained the knowledge that I could face the worst betrayal and come out stronger. I'd gained a life that was truly mine, built on my own terms, protected by boundaries I'd learned to defend. September came, marking a full year since I'd closed on the house. I walked through each room, noting the changes. The fresh paint, the furniture I'd chosen carefully, the art on the walls, the garden visible through every window. This space reflected me now, not some compromise version but the real thing. Strong, clear, unapologetic. I thought about sending Gerald a message, something about forgiveness or moving forward, but I decided against it. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed him, and moving forward didn't require his participation. I was already there, already moving, already living a life he had no access to. And that was its own form of closure. By October, I'd helped 9 people through Robert's practice. 9 people who discovered that someone they loved had stolen from them, used their names, forged their signatures. 9 people who'd felt the same crushing weight of betrayal I'd felt. And 9 people who'd found their way through it, armed with information, strategy, and the knowledge that they weren't alone. Each case reinforced something I'd learned. Betrayal didn't have to destroy you. It could inform you, strengthen you, clarify who you were and what you valued. It could teach you to protect yourself without becoming hard. To be strategic without becoming cold. To demand justice without demanding revenge. On the anniversary of that first phone call from the bank, I sat in my backyard with my laptop and reviewed everything. The payments from Gerald all on time. The scholarship fund growing steadily. The consulting work making a real difference. The house appreciating in value. The garden producing food. The cat sleeping peacefully in a patch of sunlight. Everything was exactly as it should be. I'd started this journey feeling powerless, feeling used, feeling like someone who'd always be at the bottom of someone else's ladder. But I'd ended it knowing the truth. There was no ladder. There were just people who knew their worth and people who didn't. People who protected their names and people who gave them away. People who drew boundaries and people who let others cross them. I'd learned which side I was on. And I'd learned that the strongest response to betrayal wasn't destruction. It was reconstruction. Building something new from the wreckage, something better. Something that couldn't be taken away. As the sun set over my small piece of the world, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. I thought about writing all this down, creating a guide for others who might find themselves in similar situations. But then I realized I was already doing that, one consultation at a time, one conversation at a time, one person at a time. The work would continue. The healing would continue. And I would continue not as a victim, not as someone defined by what had been done to me, but as someone who'd faced the worst and chosen to build something better. Someone who'd taken her name back and written a new story with it. Someone who'd stood at the bottom and climbed out, not by pushing others down, but by building her own ladder, one rung at a time, until she stood on solid ground with her own name on the deed and her own life in her hands. And that, I realized, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The winter of my second year in the house arrived with a ferocity that surprised everyone in Ashford. Snow fell in heavy sheets, covering the streets and turning the city quiet and slow. I spent those cold months working from home more often, the consulting practice with Robert having expanded enough that I could take on a few more hours each week without overwhelming my regular job at Crestview Financial. The work had become something I looked forward to, not just because it paid well, but because it gave me a sense of purpose that my regular analysis work didn't quite provide. Every case was different, yet they all shared the same core elements. Someone who'd been too trusting. Someone who'd put family loyalty above self-protection. Someone who'd discovered, too late, that trust without verification was just vulnerability wearing a disguise. In January, I received a call from a man named David. He was in his 50s, his voice shaking as he explained that his adult son had taken out loans in his name, using documents David had signed thinking they were for something else entirely. The debt was substantial, nearly $200,000, and collection agencies were already circling. Robert and I met with him on a gray afternoon, the snow still falling outside the office windows. David sat across from us, looking smaller than his frame suggested, his shoulders hunched under the weight of what he was carrying. My son told me they were business partnership papers, he said quietly. I wanted to support him. I wanted to believe in him. He looked up at us, his eyes wet. How could I have been so stupid? You weren't stupid, I said, my voice firm but kind. You were a parent who loved his child. That's not stupidity. That's being human. He shook his head. I should have read everything more carefully. I should have asked questions. Yes, I said. You should have. But he also shouldn't have lied to you. Both things can be true. What matters now is what you do next. Over the following weeks, We worked with David to untangle the mess his son had created. We filed fraud reports, disputed the debts, and began the slow process of rebuilding his credit. It was exhausting work, requiring hours of phone calls and paperwork, but David stayed committed. He showed up to every meeting, followed every instruction, and slowly began to reclaim his financial identity. By March, he'd successfully disputed half the debts, and the rest were in negotiation. More importantly, he'd stopped blaming himself. He'd stopped protecting his son, stopped making excuses, and started holding him accountable. The last time I saw David, he shook my hand with both of his grip strong and steady. "You saved my life," he said. I shook my head. "You saved your own life. I just showed you where the tools were." He smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from him. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have known where to look without you." After he left, Robert leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "You're really good at this, you know." "At what?" I asked. "At helping people see their own strength," he said. "That's not something you can teach. That's just who you are." The compliment settled over me in a way that felt different from praise I'd received before. It wasn't about productivity or efficiency or meeting targets. It was about something deeper. About the person I'd become through struggle, through betrayal, through the slow work of rebuilding. I'd turned my pain into something useful, and that transformation felt like the most honest version of success I'd ever experienced. In April, the snow finally melted, revealing the garden beds I'd prepared the previous fall. I spent weekends working the soil, planting seeds, watching for the first green shoots to emerge. The apple tree bloomed again, more abundantly this time, and I found myself standing beneath it often, looking up through the white blossoms at the sky beyond. There was something meditative about gardening, about putting your hands in the earth and trusting that what you planted would grow. It required patience, attention, and a willingness to let things unfold at their own pace. The same qualities I realized that had gotten me through everything with Gerald. One Saturday morning, I was pruning the rose bushes along the fence when I heard a car pull up. I turned to see Tyler getting out, holding a paper bag and 2 coffee cups. "Hope you don't mind," he said, walking up the driveway. "I brought breakfast." I set down the pruning shears and wiped my hands on my jeans. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," he said. "I just wanted to see you." We sat on the back porch, eating pastries and drinking coffee, talking about nothing important at first. His job, his girlfriend, a concert he'd been to recently. Then he said, quieter now, "I drove past the Maple Ridge house yesterday. Dad still lives there." "I know," I said. "How do you feel about that?" He asked. I thought about it. "Neutral," I said. "It's a business arrangement now. He pays rent, I collect it. There's no emotion attached anymore." He nodded slowly. "That's probably healthier than how the rest of us deal with it." "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked out at the yard. "Mom still makes excuses for him. Grandma pretends nothing happened. And I just avoid talking about it entirely. But you actually dealt with it. You didn't just sweep it under the rug." "'Cause I couldn't," I said. "I didn't have the luxury of pretending." We sat in silence for a while. Then Tyler said, "I think I need to stop avoiding hard conversations. I think I've been doing that my whole life, and it's made me kind of useless when things actually matter." "You're not useless," I said. "You're here now. That counts for something." He smiled slightly. "Thanks." After he left, I went back to the garden, but my mind stayed with the conversation. Tyler was trying, in his own clumsy way, to bridge the gap between who he'd been and who he wanted to become. It reminded me that healing wasn't just an individual process. It rippled outward, affecting everyone connected to the situation. Some people, like Gerald, might never fully acknowledge what they'd done, but others, like Tyler, were capable of growth, capable of recognizing their complicity and choosing differently. That was worth acknowledging, worth encouraging. By May, the garden was flourishing. Tomatoes climbed their cages, beans wound around their poles, and herbs filled the air with fragrance. I spent evenings harvesting lettuce and radishes, bringing them inside to wash and prepare for dinner. There was a simple satisfaction in eating food I'd grown myself, in closing the loop between effort and nourishment. The consulting work continued to expand. Robert officially brought me on as a salaried consultant, which meant steady income beyond my regular job. It also meant more responsibility, more cases, more people depending on my insight and experience. I didn't mind. If anything, it gave my days a structure and purpose that felt aligned with who I was becoming. One afternoon in late May, I received an email from Rachel, the scholarship recipient I'd met at the donor event the previous year. She just passed her CPA exam and wanted to thank me again for the support that had made it possible. "I'm starting my first job next month," she wrote, "working for a nonprofit that provides financial literacy programs to underserved communities. I keep thinking about how your donation changed the trajectory of my life, and I want to pay it forward." I replied with congratulations and encouragement, but I also felt something else. A sense of continuity. The money that Gerald had tried to steal was now creating opportunities for someone like Rachel, who would in turn create opportunities for others. The cycle of harm had been interrupted and redirected towards something generative. That felt like victory in its purest form. In June, I got a phone call from grandmother Dorothy. Her voice sounded weaker than usual, and I immediately felt a flicker of concern. "Are you okay, Grandma?" "I'm fine, dear," she said. "Just getting older. That's how it goes." She paused. "I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead," I said. "Would you come visit me? Just you and me, no one else. I'd like to talk." I hesitated, then agreed. The following Sunday, I drove to her house on Hillside Drive. It looked the same as always, the rose garden she'd tended for decades still blooming in the front yard. She met me at the door, moving slower than I remembered, and led me to the kitchen where she'd set out tea and cookies. We sat across from each other at the table where I'd eaten countless family meals growing up. She poured the tea with careful hands, then looked at me directly. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" I asked, though I had an idea. "For not seeing what Gerald was doing," she said. "For not believing it could be as bad as it was. For making you feel like you were the one causing problems when you were just trying to protect yourself." I took a sip of tea, giving myself time to absorb her words. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot." She nodded. "I've been thinking about it for a long time. About how we raised him to believe he could charm his way out of anything, how we made excuses for him when he made mistakes. We created the person who hurt you. And I'm sorry." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You didn't create him, Grandma. He made his own choices. But I appreciate you acknowledging your part in it." We talked for a long time that afternoon about family, about patterns, about the difference between loyalty and enabling. She told me stories I'd never heard before. About her own mother. About struggles she'd faced that the family had never discussed. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, unfiltered by the need to maintain appearances or protect anyone's feelings. When I left, she hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not just for what you did, but for who you are." I drove home feeling lighter, like another small piece of the past had been set down and left behind. July brought heat and long days of working in the garden early in the morning before the sun got too intense. The tomatoes were ripening now, heavy and red on the vine. I picked them carefully, filling baskets to share with neighbors and coworkers. One evening I was sitting on the porch when my phone rang. It was Robert. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. His tone was serious and I felt my stomach tighten. "What's going on?" "Gerald missed a payment," he said. "First time in almost 2 years." I sat up straighter. "When?" "It was due 3 days ago. I've sent the standard notification, but I wanted to let you know." I took a breath. "What are my options?" "Legally, you have the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings after one missed payment," he said. "But most lenders give a grace period, usually 30 days. It's up to you how you want to handle it." "I'll wait," I said. "Give him the 30 days. If he doesn't pay by then, we move forward." "Understood," Robert said. "I'll keep you posted." After we hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk, feeling the old anxiety try to creep back in. But I pushed it away. This wasn't a crisis. This was just a situation, and I had a plan for handling it. I wasn't powerless anymore. 2 weeks later, Gerald called. His voice was strained but not defensive. "Natalie, I need to talk to you about the payment." "I know," I said. "I got the notification." "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been having some financial difficulties. Business has been slow, and I'm trying to catch up, but it's been harder than I expected." I didn't respond immediately. I just waited. "I'll have the payment to you by the end of the month," he continued. "I just need a little more time." "That's fine," I said. But if you miss another one, we're going to have a problem. I understand, he said. And Natalie, I really am sorry. For all of it. I know, I said. And then I hung up. The payment came through 2 days before the deadline. Robert confirmed it and I filed the notification away. Gerald had kept his word, barely, but he'd kept it. And that was all I required. By August, the garden was winding down. The plants tired from producing all season. I spent time clearing out the spent vines, composting them, preparing the beds for fall crops. There was something satisfying about the cycle, about the way each season built on the previous one. The consulting practice was thriving. Robert had hired an additional paralegal to handle the increased caseload. And we were now seeing clients from outside Ashford, people who'd heard about our work through word of mouth or online reviews. Each case reinforced the same lessons. Documentation mattered. Boundaries mattered. Swift strategic action mattered. And perhaps most importantly, believing that you deserved to protect yourself mattered more than anything else. In September, I was invited to speak at a community workshop on financial literacy and fraud prevention. It was hosted by the same nonprofit Rachel now worked for, and she was the one who'd suggested me as a speaker. I almost declined, uncomfortable with the idea of standing in front of a room full of strangers and talking about what had happened to me. But then I realized that discomfort was just old programming, the same instinct that had kept me quiet for so long. So I accepted. The workshop was held on a Saturday morning in a community center across town. About 40 people attended, mostly women, mostly middle-aged or older. I stood at the front of the room with a microphone and told my story. Not all of it, just the relevant parts. The forged signature, the automatic transfers, the moment I decided to fight back instead of accepting what had been done to me. I talked about the importance of checking credit reports regularly, of keeping important documents secure, of being willing to question even the people you loved when something felt wrong. And I talked about what happened when you did fight back. Not the dramatic moments, but the small, steady victories. The reclaimed accounts, the rebuilt credit, the boundaries that held. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping and others joined in. Afterward, several people came up to talk to me. One woman told me her sister had been stealing her mail and opening credit cards in her name. Another said her ex-husband had taken out a loan using her information during their divorce. Each one thanked me for speaking up, for making them feel less alone, for showing them that it was possible to recover. I drove home that afternoon feeling exhausted but fulfilled. This was what the pain had been for. Not just to teach me but to equip me to help others. To turn something ugly into something useful. By October, the leaves were changing again, the cycle completing itself. I stood beneath the apple tree, now heavy with fruit for the second year, and thought about how far I'd come. 2 years since that first phone call. 2 years of fighting, rebuilding, growing. Gerald's payments had continued without interruption after that one late incident. The scholarship fund had grown substantially. The consulting practice was making a real difference. And I was living a life I designed myself, built on foundations I'd laid with my own hands. One evening, I received an email from Gerald. It was short, just a few sentences. Natalie, I wanted you to know that I've started therapy. I'm working on understanding why I did what I did, and I'm trying to become someone who doesn't hurt the people he claims to care about. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm trying. I read it twice, then closed my laptop without responding. His journey was his own. Mine was separate. And that separation was healthy, necessary, final. In November, I hosted Thanksgiving at my house for the first time. Not the whole family, just the people I actually wanted there. Tyler and his girlfriend. Few close friends. Rachel, who'd become something like a mentee over the past year. We cooked together, laughed, told stories, and sat around my table eating food from my garden. It was small and imperfect and entirely my own. No forced smiles, no underlying tension, no walking on eggshells. Just people who genuinely cared about each other, gathered in a space that felt safe. As I looked around the table that evening, I realized something. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my place in rooms that didn't value me, trying to be useful enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough to deserve belonging. But belonging wasn't something you earned through self-erasure. It was something you created by being yourself and inviting others to meet you there. This table, these people, this life, they were proof that the right connections didn't require you to shrink. They required you to grow. December arrived with the first real cold snap, frost covering the windows in the morning. I spent the last month of the year reflecting, journaling, planning for the year ahead. The consulting practice would expand again. I was considering writing a guide for fraud victims, something practical and accessible. And I was thinking about buying another property, maybe a small duplex I could rent out, building equity and creating more opportunities for the scholarship fund. The payments from Gerald would continue. The work would continue. And I would continue, not as someone defined by what had been done to her, but as someone who'd faced betrayal and chosen to build something better from the wreckage. Someone who'd learned that the bottom wasn't a place you stayed. It was just a place you pushed off from, launching yourself towards something higher, something truer, something entirely your own. On New Year's Eve, I stood in my backyard under a clear, cold sky, watching my breath form clouds in the air. I thought about Gerald's words from that birthday party 2 years ago. Someone has to be at the bottom. He'd meant it as a judgment, as a way of putting me in my place. But he'd been wrong. There was no fixed bottom, no predetermined hierarchy of worth. There were just people who knew their value and people who didn't. People who protected what was theirs and people who gave it away. People who built boundaries and people who let others trample them. I'd learned which side I was on. And I'd learned that the strongest foundation you could build wasn't made of money or property or status. It was made of self-knowledge, self-respect, and the unwavering commitment to protect both. As midnight approached, I raised a glass to the cold air, to the bare apple tree, to the dark sky above. Not to the past but to the future. To every person who'd ever been told they belonged at the bottom. To every signature forged, every trust betrayed, every quiet person who'd been underestimated. This was for all of us. The ones who learned to fight back without losing ourselves. The ones who turned pain into purpose. The ones who reclaimed our names and wrote our own stories. The ones who built our own ladders and climbed out of the depths not through cruelty, but through clarity, through strategy, through the simple revolutionary act of choosing ourselves. The clock struck midnight. I drank. And in the silence that followed, I smiled. Because I wasn't at the bottom. I never had been. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to rise. And now, standing on solid ground with my own name on everything that mattered, I finally understood what it meant to be free. The third year began with unexpected possibilities. In January, I received a call from a publisher who'd heard about the workshop I'd conducted in September. Someone had recorded it and posted clips online, and apparently it had gained traction in communities focused on financial advocacy and elder protection. The publisher's name was Miranda Chan, no relation to Robert, and she had a proposition. "We're looking for authentic voices in the personal finance space," she said over the phone. People who've lived through these situations, not just academics who study them from a distance. "Would you be interested in writing a book?" "A book?" I repeated, caught off guard. "About your experience with financial fraud and family betrayal," she said. "But more than that, about the practical steps you took to recover. We're envisioning something that's part memoir, part handbook. Something that could actually help people." "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course," she replied. "Take your time. But I think you have something important to say and I think people need to hear it." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. Writing a book meant going public with everything, meant exposing the details of what Gerald had done, what my family had allowed. It meant making myself vulnerable in a way I'd carefully avoided. But it also meant reaching people I'd never meet, people who might be sitting in their own kitchens right now, staring at fraud notices, feeling alone and ashamed. If my story could help even a handful of them, wasn't that worth the discomfort? I called Robert that evening and told him about the offer. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think it's brilliant," he said. "You've already been doing this work one person at a time. A book would just expand your reach. Are you worried about your family's reaction?" Of course, I admitted. "But I'm more worried about staying silent when I could be helping people." "Then you have your answer," he said. Over the next few weeks, I met with Miranda several times, discussing the structure and scope of the book. We decided it would alternate between narrative chapters telling my story and practical chapters outlining specific steps readers could take if they found themselves in similar situations. Topics like how to identify forged signatures, how to dispute fraudulent accounts, how to protect yourself legally, and perhaps most importantly, how to navigate the emotional complexity of betraying betrayers within your own family. I started writing in February, carving out time early in the mornings before work. The words came slowly at first, each sentence requiring me to relive moments I'd rather forget. But as I continued, something shifted. Writing became a form of processing, a way to extract meaning from pain. I wasn't just recounting what had happened. I was analyzing it, understanding it from a distance I hadn't possessed while living through it. By March, I had several chapters drafted. Miranda connected me with an editor named Thomas, who helped refine my voice without stripping away its authenticity. He pushed me to be more specific, more vulnerable, more willing to acknowledge the messy emotions that accompanied every decision. "This part feels too clean," he'd write in the margins. "Tell us what you were really feeling." So I did. I wrote about the shame I'd felt initially, the sense that I should have known better, that being victimized somehow reflected poorly on my intelligence or awareness. I wrote about the anger that had burned in my chest during those early months, the fantasies of public confrontation I'd never acted on. I wrote about the loneliness of cutting off contact with most of my family, the holidays spent alone, the moments when I'd questioned whether I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. And I wrote about the gradual emergence of something else. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind that came from knowing you'd protected yourself, from building a life on foundations you'd laid yourself. The consulting work continued throughout this period, and I found that working on the book actually made me better at my client consultations. I developed a framework for understanding these situations, a way of breaking them down into manageable components. Every case still felt personal, but I no longer took the emotional weight home with me the way I had at the beginning. In April, I worked with a young woman named Keisha whose mother had been using her social security number since Keisha was a teenager. The debt was substantial, tens of thousands of dollars accumulated over nearly a decade, and Keisha had only discovered it when she applied for her first apartment after college. She came to our first meeting with her entire credit report printed out, page after page of accounts she'd never opened, loans she'd never taken. "I don't understand how she could do this," Keisha said, her voice breaking. "I'm her daughter. How could she steal from me for 10 years? "Because she didn't see it as stealing," I said gently. "She saw it as borrowing. She saw you as an extension of herself, not as a separate person with your own financial identity. That doesn't make it right. Just explains the mindset." "But she's my mom," Keisha whispered. "I know," I said. "That's the hardest part." Working with Keisha reminded me of my own early days, that terrible period of cognitive dissonance when your brain can't reconcile the person you thought you knew with the person who hurt you. We spent weeks building her case, filing reports, disputing accounts. And slowly, Keisha began to understand that loving her mother and holding her accountable weren't mutually exclusive. "You can still care about her," I told her during one session, "but you have to care about yourself more." By May, the manuscript was halfway complete. I'd written through the discovery, the investigation, the confrontation, and the legal maneuvering. Now I was working on the chapters about recovery and rebuilding, the part of the story that felt most important to me. Anyone could tell a revenge story, but I wanted to tell a restoration story. I wanted people to see that the goal wasn't destruction, it was reclamation. One afternoon, I received an email from Aunt Pamela. It was short and tentative. "Natalie, I heard through Tyler that you're writing a book about what happened with Gerald. I just wanted to reach out and ask if we could talk before it's published. I'd like to understand what you're planning to say." I stared at the email for a long time before responding. "We can talk," I wrote back. "But I'm not asking for permission, and I'm not changing what I've written to protect anyone who chose not to protect me. If you want to understand, I'm willing to explain. But that's all I can offer." We met the following week at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop neither of us frequented. Pamela looked older than I remembered, worry lines etched deeper around her eyes. She ordered tea but didn't drink it, just wrapped her hands around the cup like she needed something to hold on to. "I'm not here to ask you not to publish," she said after a long silence. "I know I don't have that right. I just want to know why. Why does it matter?" I asked. "Because Gerald is my husband," she said. "Because this will affect him, affect our family, affect Tyler. Because once it's out there, it's permanent." I leaned back in my chair. "Everything Gerald did was permanent too," I said. "The damage to my credit was permanent. The money he stole was permanent. The trust he broke was permanent. I'm just making sure the record is accurate. She looked down at her untouched tea. I know he hurt you. I do. But he's been trying to change. He's in therapy, he's making his payments, he's working on himself. That's good, I said. I'm glad he's doing that. But it doesn't erase what happened, and it doesn't obligate me to stay silent about it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, I'm ashamed. Of what? Of not stopping him, she said. Of knowing something was wrong and not asking questions. Of choosing to protect him instead of you. I appreciated the admission more than I expected. Thank you for saying that, I said. But this book isn't about punishing Gerald. It's about helping people who are going through what I went through. If he's changed, then he should be able to handle the truth being told. She nodded slowly, though she didn't look convinced. I'm not asking you to like it, I said. I'm just asking you to understand why it matters. In June, I finished the first complete draft of the manuscript. It totaled just over 70,000 words. A thorough accounting of everything from that first shocking phone call to the present moment. I sent it to Miranda and Thomas and waited nervously for their feedback. When Thomas called 3 days later, I braced myself for criticism. This is powerful work, Natalie, he said. Really powerful. You've managed to be both vulnerable and instructive, personal and universal. I think this is going to help a lot of people. Relief flooded through me. Really? Really, he confirmed. We'll need to do some minor revisions, tighten up a few sections, but the core of it is solid. You should be proud. I was proud. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd created something meaningful. Something that justified everything I'd been through. The pain had a purpose now. Documented and distilled into something that might spare others from similar suffering. The consulting practice continued to grow throughout the summer. Robert officially made me a partner in the firm, which meant equal say in decisions and a larger share of the profits. We hired another attorney to handle the increased caseload, a sharp young woman named Olivia who specialized in elder financial abuse. Together, we were building something significant, a practice that didn't just win cases but changed lives. In July, I worked with an elderly man named Frank whose grandson had convinced him to co-sign on a business loan. The business had failed immediately, and Frank was left holding debt he couldn't possibly repay on his fixed income. He came to us in despair, certain he'd lose his house. We don't let that happen, I told him firmly. We have options. Over the next several months, we negotiated with the lenders, proved that Frank had been misled about the nature of the loan, and eventually got the debt discharged. When Frank left our office after the final settlement, he hugged me tightly. You gave me my life back, he said. You gave yourself your life back, I corrected gently. We just showed you how. By August, the book was going through final edits and design. Miranda sent me mock-ups of potential cover designs, and we settled on something simple and strong. My name in bold letters, the title underneath. Reclaiming Your Name. A Survivor's Guide to Financial Fraud and Family Betrayal. The publication date was set for January, which meant I had a few months to prepare for whatever reaction might come. I knew the book would make waves in my family. I knew Gerald would likely be angry, that some relatives would see it as an act of betrayal worse than what he'd done to me. But I also knew I was doing the right thing. Silence had protected no one. Truth might actually help someone. In September, I did my first interview for the book's promotional campaign. It was with a podcast that focused on personal finance and economic justice, and the host asked thoughtful questions that allowed me to explain not just what had happened, but why it mattered on a systemic level. Family financial fraud is drastically underreported, I said during the interview, because the victims are ashamed, because they don't want to destroy family relationships, because society tells them they should have seen it coming. But the truth is, we trust the people we love. That's not a weakness. The criminals are the ones who exploit that trust. The episode wouldn't air until closer to the book's release, but recording it made everything feel more real. I was about to step into a much more public role and there was no going back. That evening, I sat in my backyard and thought about the apple tree. 3 years of growth, 3 years of pruning and care, and now it produced abundant fruit every season. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was true. You couldn't rush growth. You couldn't force fruit. You just had to tend the tree and trust the process. In October, I received a letter from Gerald. It was handwritten, several pages long, delivered to my house in a plain envelope. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. He wrote about his therapy, about the things he was learning about himself. He acknowledged specifically what he'd done, listing out the fraud, the theft, the manipulation without minimizing any of it. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said he understood why I'd done what I'd done, and he hoped that someday, maybe years from now, we might be able to have a conversation as equals, as people who'd both grown beyond who we used to be. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in a drawer. It didn't change anything, but it also didn't need to. Gerald's journey was his own. Mine continued separately, parallel but no longer intersecting. And that felt right. By November, advance copies of the book were being sent to reviewers and influencers in the personal finance space. Early responses were positive, with several people calling it essential reading for anyone navigating family dynamics and money. One reviewer wrote that it should be required reading in high schools, that young people needed to understand financial boundaries before they inherited the dysfunction of previous generations. I appreciated the validation, but I also tried not to attach too much importance to external praise. The book was what it was. It would help who it would help. That was enough. On Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner again, a tradition now. Tyler and his girlfriend came, along with several friends and colleagues. Rachel brought her new partner. Robert and his husband stopped by for dessert. It was loud and warm and exactly what I needed. As we sat around the table, Tyler raised his glass. To Natalie, he said, for showing all of us what courage actually looks like. Everyone raised their glasses and I felt tears prick my eyes. Not from sadness but from gratitude. These people saw me. They valued me. They celebrated me. And I'd built this community myself, piece by piece, through the simple act of being honest about who I was and what I needed. December arrived with cold rain and short days. I spent the month preparing for the book launch, doing additional interviews, planning the release event Miranda had organized. The event would be held at a bookstore downtown, with a reading and Q&A session followed by a signing. I was nervous but also ready. This was the culmination of 3 years of work, 3 years of transformation. On the last day of the year, I stood in my backyard one more time, looking at the bare apple tree against the winter sky. 3 years since that phone call. 3 years since I discovered what Gerald had done. 3 years of fighting, rebuilding, and ultimately thriving. I thought about the person I'd been then, scared and overwhelmed and uncertain whether she could survive what had been done to her. And I thought about the person I was now, strong and clear and unshakable in my knowledge of my own worth. The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required facing uncomfortable truths, making difficult choices, and holding boundaries even when it hurt. But it had been worth it. Every hard conversation, every legal filing, every moment of standing alone. All of it had led here, to this life I'd built with my own hands. As midnight approached, I didn't make resolutions. I just acknowledged what was true. I'd taken my name back. I'd reclaimed my story. And I'd turned betrayal into something that helped others. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The clock struck 12, and I welcomed the new year quietly, standing in the cold with my breath-forming clouds in the air. Tomorrow the book would launch. Tomorrow people would read my story and maybe see themselves in it. Tomorrow the work would continue. But tonight I just stood in my own backyard on my own land with my own name on the deed and felt peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.